Crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency. The final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
Yeah, welcome in to our latest edition of the 2024 Team Autopsy Report. Today we got the UCLA Bruins on the autopsy table. A lot to cover. I got you for about the next 27 minutes, so let's not waste any time. For those of you watching on our YouTube channel, thank you for joining us. Please hit that like and subscribe button. Get notifications of the remaining part of this series. If you missed any, those are available on the channel. If you're streaming this on our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP, I want to say thank you as well. Feel free to give us a like and follow there at Crunch Time VIP on Twitter. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, thank you for joining us as well. Always hit the like and subscribe button, leave that 5-star rating so we can continue to connect with more college football fans. All right, so Deshaun Foster, head coach, UCLA, back at his alma mater. Folks, this is one of the best running backs in UCLA's history. So him coming back to this program, it just means a little bit more to him. So in his first ever stint as a head coach, the Bruins went 5-7 last year. So no need to really recap his history because we're going to have all of that capsule in this autopsy report. 3-6 in conference play. Now, that's going to be an adjustment period for not only this team being in a new conference, but the landscape that is going to come along with that, with the additional travel now going to hit all 4 time zones while playing in this new league. So that is something to bear in mind there. Okay, so let's jump right in. let's talk about this team as far as a betting standpoint. Last year in June, you could have got their win total at 5.5. If you were inclined to take the over, you came up just a little bit short as they failed to reach that by one game there. Now, when we take a look at our in-season composite win total, 3 very unique but highly predictive from a standpoint of evaluating how a team should be from a win-loss standpoint. We had the Bruins at 4.7, so basically a 5-win team. So we felt like as the season was going along, our data on UCLA was extremely solid. Speaking of schedule, 2 unique but different components we look at it when we're evaluating a team's schedule. The first part of that is your strength of schedule. Basically, how do we power rank your opponents? When you play in a conference like the Big Ten or any of the 4 major conferences, you really only control about 20 to 25% of your schedule, basically your non-conference. And then the remaining part of your schedule in conference is strictly a luck of the draw. You could play a lot of high finishing teams in your conference, which is going to boost up your strength of schedule, but could potentially drag down your win totals from a season standpoint because you're playing better competition. Or the inverse could happen where you're playing a light schedule in your conference where you're basically playing a lot of the bottom feeders in your conference and you're rolling up a bunch of wins. So that's something to keep in mind here when I talk about their strength of schedule. Now, your strength of record. Think of that as your opponent's winning percentage. Was your opponents racking up a lot of wins versus whoever was on their schedule last year? So when we take those two things in conjunction with each other, we kind of get a better feel of where your team was last year. And folks, UCLA's schedule, you're going to see some eye-popping data points here. A strength of schedule of 0.650. This was the toughest schedule in college football last year for us. Now, when we look at their strength of record, 646, that was the 7th out of 134 teams. So not only did they play a difficult schedule, their opponents racked up a lot of wins last year. And as I get ready to go through this for our YouTube and followers on Twitter, you'll see that information on the screen. Podcast listeners, I got you covered right here. So let's take a look at those opponents' records, and you can kind of see where some of that is going to fall into play here. Hawaii, they played last year 5-7. America's team in Indiana, 11-1. LSU finished the regular season 8-4. Oregon, 12-0 in the regular season. Penn State, 11-1. Minnesota, 7-5. Rutgers was 7-5. Nebraska, 6-6. Iowa was 8-4. And then their final 3 opponents, all 6-6. The Washington Huskies, USC, and then Fresno State. Outside of Hawaii, all of their opponents finished the regular season with at least 6 wins last year. So this team faced off against 3 of the 4 highest finishing teams in the Big Ten last year. The only exception not playing Ohio State. So that's where you see that strength of schedule really kind of come into play there. And if you're looking on YouTube or following us on Twitter, you can see where we have their opponents power ranked. 3 of their opponents all finished inside of the top 10. 5 inside of the top 20. 6 inside of the top 25. So this team faced a gauntlet of a schedule. Only Hawaii outside of the top 100 last year. Now, let's talk about the quality of defenses from a power ranking standpoint that this UCLA team have to go up against last year. We use a baseline number of 68. That's how many Power 4 teams we had last year. So let's count them out. How many of their opponents were inside of that top 68? America's team in Indiana was 27th from a defensive power ranking standpoint. LSU was 29th, Oregon 10th, Penn State 19th, Minnesota, surprisingly, 18th, Rutgers 64th, Nebraska 14th, Iowa 22nd, Washington 43rd, and then finally, USC was 38th. 10 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. Fresno State barely on the outside at 69, and then, of course, Hawaii at 116. When you think about it, an average power ranking of 39, you're looking at a team that is probably worst case scenario from a defensive standpoint, probably in that 9-3 range. I said there was a possibility of a game that this team won that maybe they could have lost last year. If I had to point out that game, considering the opponent and the score, you would have to go back to week 1 when they played Hawaii, winning that game 16-13. Easily a game that they could have lost and put them under our composite win total for the season. Now, let's dive into the offense because I think we're going to have some different numbers here to give you. So for the offense, we're going to give you the NCAA average, the Bruins data point in that category, as we like to call it, their accounting stats. And then finally, we're going to give you our adjusted number for that category based on the level of opponents that they played. So you're going to probably see some improvements on their data from here. When we flip it over to the defense, we're just going to give you their accounting stats and then their adjusted number. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Average team last year scored 28 points per game. The Bruins only 18.4, almost a 10 point per game difference there from the average team last year. When we adjust for opponents, we do see a slight uptick to 22.2 points per game. Still a touchdown off the average, but offense a little bit better than what their accounting stats show. Average team passing the ball last year, 227 yards per game last season. The Bruins were at 242. When we adjust for opponent, do see a bump up to 255 yards passing per game. Once again, when we adjust for opponents, that's where we come up with that number. As far as run game, now this is something this head coach is going to want to improve immediately. Average team last year, 160 yards per game. The Bruins could only muster 87 yards rushing per game. Now, when we adjust that for opponent, it does go up to 124, but still significantly short of what the average team was able to produce last year. And then total offense, average team about 387 yards per game. The Bruins were at 329. However, when we adjust for opponent, we do see a 50-yard per game improvement there to 379 yards per game, much closer to what the average team faced last year. Let's go deeper into the numbers here. In our advanced numbers, we look at adjusted drives ending with the score, adjusted drives ending with the touchdown, and adjusted third down conversion. Average team last year, drives ending with a score, about 40%. The Bruins were at 42.5. Average drive ending with a touchdown for each team, for an average team, I should say, about 29%. The Bruins, a little bit short on that end of the scale, 24%. So they were scoring points more times than not. They were kicking field goals, not putting that ball into the paint. And then finally, third down conversions. Average team, about 39% conversion rate there. The Bruins, 43.9%. So a little bit better on third downs. This team surrendered a lot of sacks last year. The average team surrendered about 24 sacks during the regular season. The Bruins surrendered 34, almost 10 more than the average team. So got to do a better job of protecting the quarterback there. Got to do a better job of him getting rid of the ball play calling also is going to have a big key in that as well. Team also committed 17 turnovers on offense last year. Let's take one more final look at the offensive breakdown. We call these our 3 E's. How effective, explosive, and efficient were how was this team during last season? If I can stop stumbling over my words here. Okay, so the Bruins were 80th in effectiveness last season. As far as being explosive, 102nd. And then as far as efficiency goes, 71st. The UCLA Bruins were our 84th ranked offense in college football in 2024. If I got to bullet point this offense, I would absolutely say this unit struggled with efficiency, their rushing attack, and could not find any explosive plays. And when I look at their quarterback, Ethan Garber, 11 games last year, did complete 65, let's call it 65% of his passes for a little over 2,700 yards, 16 touchdowns, but big turnover problem, 11 INTs, 7.5 yards per attempt. That's almost a full yard short of where we want to see an offense in college football. So that's going to be something that they're going to have to address in the offseason. Here's the biggest bugaboo. TJ Harden was their leading rusher last year. In 12 games, he only had 124 rushing attempts. Folks, that's barely 10 rushing attempts per game, 506 yards for the season, 4.1 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. Young man only averaged 42 yards rushing per game last year. That is not big-time offense, and you're not going to win a lot of games when you cannot control the line of scrimmage. He was also second as far as their receiving yardage goes. So when you add up his stats, he was good for about 70, let's call it 73 yards per game in total offense. You got to get better production from your offense there. Okay, now let's take a look at the defense and pull up that information. Again, we want to take a look at the caliber of offenses that UCLA's defense had to really go up against last year. And we'll stick with that baseline number of 68. Now, America's team, Indiana, third as far as our offensive power rankings last year. LSU was 21st, Oregon 11th, Penn State was 48th, Minnesota 58th, Rutgers 46th, Nebraska 67th, Iowa was 30th in our offensive power rankings. And then finally, USC was 27th. So 9 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. However, an average power ranking of 51, now you're looking at an offense that would have probably been on about a 6-6 team last year. So the defense faced a much softer schedule of opponents than their offensive counterparts. So let's see if we see any adjustments there from our adjusted numbers for UCLA's defense. Okay, so points per game allowed, 25.3. When we adjust for opponent, ticks down to 22.2. Passing yards per game allowed, 245 yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, significant reduction there, down to 212 yards per game. So an improvement metrically of 33 yards there per game. Rush defense was still phenomenal, 96 yards per game from an accounting stat standpoint. When we adjust for opponent, slight regression to 108 yards per game. So about 12 yards difference there. As far as total offense, accounting stat says that this team gave up 341 yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, goes down to about 320 yards per game. So they're about 20 yards better than what their statistics will show you. As far as their opponent's drives ending with a score, 43% of their opponent's drive ended with either a touchdown or a field goal. As far as their opponent's drives ending with the touchdowns, basically right there on the average, 29%. And then their opponents on third downs, when we adjust that, 44.4%. So about 5 yards more than what the average team gave up as far as a conversion rate on third down goes. This team was about average as far as getting after the quarterback, 22 sacks last season. Did a great job on fourth down defense. 5 out of 14 were their opponents last year. You're looking at a conversion rate of 36%, significantly lower than the average last year. Forced 13 turnovers, so we're going to see a negative turnover differential there. Now let's take a look at the Bruins' defensive 3 E's. This defensive unit was the 80th ranked team as far as effective defense goes. This team was really good as far as not giving up explosive plays. 46th out of 134 teams last year. Phenomenal there. And as far as efficiency on defense, 70th. So when we look at their overall rankings from the defensive standpoint, 64th out of 134 teams, which is 20 spots better than what their offense was able to generate. So you can see the benefits of playing a softer schedule for their defense had. They were absolutely able, from a statistical standpoint, take advantage of that by playing solid defense. The special teams, 80% field goal percentage there, more than good enough there. Looking at the punt unit, solid when we're looking at a unit that averaged 43 yards per punt. Now, here's the negative. We talked about it, -4 in the turnover differential. Got to improve there and got to cut down on the penalties. 8.2 penalties per game. That's more than 2 penalties, more than the average team last year. Almost 69 yards worth of penalty yardage. That, again, about an additional 17 more than the average team last year. In one-score games, Deshaun Foster was able to get this team to a 5-2 mark there, with all of their wins coming by 1 score or less. You don't want to live by that data point, because that means you're not able to get margin on the teams that you're playing against. And as far as quality opponents, 2 wins, 7 losses there. So when they stepped up in weight class, they absolutely were getting shut down quite a bit. Looks like their 2 best quality wins came against Iowa, winning that game 20-17, and then beating Nebraska 27-20. As far as being aggressive going for it on fourth downs, Coach Foster, about 10%. His attempt rate ranks 115th out of 144 qualifying head coaches, and basically right there on the average of what a team converted on fourth downs last season. 50%, going 8 out of 16. Now, let's take a look at the splits for this team. How did this team look from an offensive, then a defensive standpoint in the games that they won versus the games that they lost? In their 5 victories, the Bruins were averaging 23.6 points per game. The passing offense was averaging 273 yards per game on 35 attempts, 7.8 yards per attempt, 11.9 yards per completion. The run game was decent in those losses. I won't say great. I'm sorry, in those wins, I should say. 30 rushing attempts in those 5 games that they won, only 118 yards, 3.9 yards per rushing attempt. Conversion rate on third downs in those victories, this team was converting at a 49% clip and did convert 1 out of 2 fourth down tries. So something to keep in mind there. Did commit 6 turnovers in those 5 victories. In their 7 losses, I talked about those losses coming against teams when they had to step up in weight class. Just 14.7 points per game. The passing offense suffered, goes down about 53 yards to 220 yards per game on 32 attempts, 6.9 yards per attempt, 10.7 yards per completion. Not pushing the ball down the field, not able to make big plays after the catch from this offense. The run game also suffered. 27 rushing attempts per game, but just 64 yards per game rushing, 2.4 yards per rushing attempt. So basically, when this team lost, they're missing 107 yards of total offense in those games. In the 7 games that they lost, the third down conversion rate goes down significantly, 37.9%. Still converting 50% on fourth downs, but committed 11 turnovers in those 7 losses. Let's take a look at the defensive splits here. I think we're going to kind of see the same correlation there. In the 5 victories, 19 points per game. So stifling defense there in those victories. 225 yards is what their opponents were throwing for on 33 attempts, 6.8 yards per attempt, 11.5 yards per completion. The run defense was phenomenal in those 5 victories, 28 attempts by their opponents for only 88 yards, 3.2 yards per rushing attempt. Their opponents converting on third downs, 39%. On fourth downs, converting at a 44% clip. However, they did force 10 turnovers in those 5 victories. So average defense forcing 2 turnovers per game. That's how you're able to win some of those tight ball games that they were in. Having that plus differential as far as the turnover battle goes. Now, as far as their 7 losses, 30 points per game. The pass defense giving up an additional 33 yards per game, 258 yards per game passing on 35 attempts, 7.4 yards per attempt, 10.6 yards per completion. The run defense kind of held its own even in those 7 losses, 29 attempts by their opponents for just 102 yards, 3.5 yards per rushing attempt. So this team was really solid against the run all season long there. We talked about that early on in the pod here. Their opponents converting on third downs goes up to 54% in those 7 losses. So you're talking about a difference of 15 percentage points there by their opponents. Now, here's the interesting number here. Their opponents only converted 1 out of 5 attempts on fourth downs in those 7 losses. That's interesting. But in turnovers, only forced 3 turnovers in those 7 losses. So you're talking about less than half a turnover per game. So something to keep in mind there. I think we're ready to get to the final grade and the final verdict for the Bruins here. The UCLA Bruins will get a final grade of a C+ from us. You got to take into account that UCLA had one of the toughest schedules in college football and still managed to win 5 games. However, their inconsistent rushing attack, offensive line struggles prevented this team from achieving more. Addressing these issues will be critical for success in this upcoming season. UCLA's season absolutely was defined by inconsistency. At times, we talked about it. The offense looked like it could be a team that could finish in the top tier of the Big Ten, but that lack of offensive consistency week in and week out definitely held this team back. The defense had moments of strength, gave up some big plays in some of those games where they stepped up in weight class, but it was more so seeing the pass defense really kind of lose containment there in some of those games. If this team can stabilize the quarterback play and improve overall consistency, the Bruins could absolutely take a step forward next year. And that's going to lead me right into the 3 keys for the Bruins in 2025. Key number 1, find stability at quarterback. Having a clear leader at the quarterback position is necessary for this offense to grow. I talked about it. You can't have your quarterback turning the ball over from just a pure interception standpoint 11 times. Got to cut that number in half, and you want to see that touchdown number go from 16 in the season to now about 28 If their starting quarterback can get you 28 passing touchdowns, so let's just call it 5 or 6 INTs, you could absolutely see the Bruins take a step forward there. Got to limit the defensive laps. That's going to be key number 2. We talked about it. Pass defense kind of gave up some explosive plays there. So for UCLA, it is going to be paramount to address that secondary issue. Also helps when you improve the pass rush as well. And then finally, executing better in crunch time. Love that. UCLA needs to find a way to close out games stronger to avoid costly losses. And when I mean close out games better in crunch time, that means when they step up in weight class, they got to get this game to the fourth quarter and then find a way to continue to execute better than their opponents and maybe pull out an additional win or 2. If the Bruins focus on these 3 key areas, UCLA can absolutely position itself to finish in the top half of the Big Ten standings next season.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.